Are you ready to unlock your full potential? Motivational speaker, the comeback coach, and goal crusher Joe Rivera brings you inspiring leaders, incredible stories, and valuable lessons on how you can change, grow, and reforge your life. Now, here's your host, Joe Rivera.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Reforge Your Life show. I'm your host, Joe Rivera, and here at the Reforge Your Life show, we like to show you that the comeback is more than possible. And today, man, I'm honored to bring on this special guest, man. I'm psyched about it. She's an author, a coach, and she's a Reverend Jocelyn Jones. Welcome to the show, and thank you for coming through, man.
Joe, it's such a pleasure to be on your show. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. And you know, I've heard your story, but some people in the audience may not have heard the story, and I can't tell it anywhere close to as good as you can. So please share your story with the audience.
Yeah, for sure. So it started several years ago in my early 20s when I was working in the community in the basement of my church's youth center on Chicago South Side. I had just got my first job at the age of 23 as a violence prevention manager. I was working with young people to help them to organize a youth council. And in the area that I was serving, it was considered one of the top violent communities in the city of Chicago. And so gun violence was rampant, and I was seeing how so many of the lives of the young people who I was serving and families were shattered due to gun violence. And I remember inviting one of the young people into my office. Her name was Ashley, and she had just lost a friend to gun violence. And I said, Ashley, you know, it's okay for you to cry. And she said something, Joe, that just wrecked me. She said, Miss Jocelyn, if I cried every time I lost someone to gun violence, I'd be crying all the time. Joe, what do you even say to that? And so, you know, I didn't know really how to help her at the time, and I didn't have language to describe what Ashley was going through, but I knew I wanted to do something to help those people around me who were impacted by gun violence. So I went back to school to get my master's degree in social work from the University of Chicago. And then eventually I went to seminary school, and I'm learning, I'm taking classes on pastoral care. And it finally helped me to see what was happening that I didn't know how to describe earlier. People were experiencing trauma. 20 years ago, people weren't talking about trauma to the extent that they're doing now. And I said, okay, as I continue to work in the community, launching different violence prevention initiatives, eventually I said, I want to start my own Christian trauma healing ministry. And so I left my job at the youth center after a decade to step out and start my own practice. And eventually I started a Christian counseling practice that focused on trauma healing. And I also started running trauma healing groups locally and then nationally, helping churches to start trauma healing ministries across the country. And that is something, Joe, I'm extremely passionate about. As a domestic violence survivor myself, I realized that churches have such influence in someone's lives and the ability to help be a hub of healing if they have the right tools, language, and resources. And that's one of my major commitments in helping those who've been impacted by trauma.
And that's awesome. Congratulations on what you're doing out there to give back to the community. And congratulations on overcoming the trauma that you overcame in your life, because domestic violence isn't something that it's easy to get through for some people. There's some people who don't bounce back; they stay stuck in that situation, and because they don't know how to get out. So I'm curious though, because I kind of want to touch on that a little bit,
Yeah.
and if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm.
And what that was like to overcome that, and the challenges faced through overcoming.
Thank you for that question, Joe. That's a tough subject to talk about because I believe for several people who find themselves in an abusive relationship, there's a moment where you're like, how did I get here? Because it doesn't start off like that. And until I was in it, I thought that that would happen to people maybe who might have had, how do I say it? And if we can edit this piece here, let me kind of, can we edit this part? Let me start that question over. Because this is Joe. This is actually the first time I'm really talking about this at this level.
Are you cool with it?
I am cool with it.
Okay.
I just want to choose my words wisely. so I'm gonna run that back. So thank you for that question, Joe. I think when it comes to domestic violence and finding yourself in that situation, it's like waking up in a nightmare when you realize you're in it and you don't know how to get out. And for me, I struggled when I found myself in this abusive relationship because, Joe, I studied trauma. I went to school and took classes on domestic violence. I had a counseling practice. And yet and still, I found myself in this abusive relationship. But the thing was, I didn't see it as abuse at the time because he didn't hit me. And that's the thing. I think when people find out or hear that someone's being abused, they automatically think that person's getting punched or that person's getting physically abused. But there's other types of abuse. There's sexual abuse, there's emotional abuse, there's financial abuse, there's legal abuse. And so these different other forms of abuse I'm finding out from my personal experience is happening throughout faith-based settings in the church, is happening all over. But sometimes you don't have language for it because it's almost easier to recognize if someone hits you, this is wrong, versus when you're being manipulated and emotionally abused. And so for me, making a decision to walk away from my marriage as someone who was and is clergy was very difficult because my entire life I was raised to believe that you don't get divorced. And for me, having parents who were almost married for 50 years before my dad's death, I never thought I would walk away from my marriage. And so that decision to do that was extremely difficult for me because in my mind, I was failing. And in my mind, how could I be so stupid to allow myself to get in this abusive relationship? But I had to realize, Joe, that it wasn't a matter of me being stupid. It wasn't a matter of, me carrying this shame. It can happen to anybody. It doesn't matter your education, your religious beliefs, your position in life. Domestic violence is happening behind closed doors in the church pews, in your office place. And the thing was, while I was going through it, I was able to pretend that everything was okay when I was really feeling like I was dying inside. And so for me, that was my rock bottom, because when I left that marriage, I was disconnected from my church family that I had been a part of for almost 17 years. I had left my own home for over a year. So I'm couch surfing as I'm trying to build my business and handle all these speaking engagements. Financially, I'm struggling to have to move back in with my mom after being on my own for several years, while still trying to show up and do ministry for others. It was a rock bottom moment. But by God's grace and with the support of other people and making sure that I was in counseling, I was able to make through that experience, Joe, and I'm so much better for it.
And I'm thankful that you did get through it, and that you're here today doing the work that you're doing and being able to help others that go through it. And man, there's a lot to unpack for what you just shared. Thanks for sharing that, by the way. I know that's not easy for people to go back and revisit the trauma. You know? And you mentioned something that's so important for the audience to pick up out there, because maybe there's someone who's struggling from it now and doesn't know how to overcome that, right? But abuse comes in so many different forms. It doesn't have to be a physical abuse where somebody's actually putting their hands on you, because and some of the other abuses can be even more traumatizing, right? Especially when you're talking about verbal abuse and what it does to the mental, and you said financial abuse. There's so many different forms that it could fall under, and not realizing that, damn, I need help with this. I can't live like this. It is important for someone to be able to realize that there is help out there. You can make change in your life. You don't have to stay in that situation that's bringing you down, because why deal with that catabolic toxic energy if you don't have to? Because that's what it creates. It creates that toxic energy in your life that just brings you down and tells you that you're not worthy. Tells you, like you said, that why am I so stupid for being in this situation? And then you also mentioned something about the belief system that gets built up because being in a religious environment, right? Some religions and they don't believe in divorce. And then when you grow up in a household where it's 50 years of marriage, you're like, damn, I can't get divorced. Like, how am I going to face everybody from my church? How am I going to face my family when I'm going through, I got to go through getting divorced? So what was it like overcoming that part of that belief system that got built up?
Joe, it took me deconstructing and unlearning certain beliefs that I had my whole life and looking at it from a different lens. Because for me, one of the messages that I heard is there's only two reasons that you get divorced. Is if there's adultery involved and if someone abandons you, like if you're abandoned. That's what I had heard previously. But I didn't realize until after I had gone through this experience that someone can also break the marriage covenant through abuse because they're not honoring their vows in the marriage. They're violating it through their behavior of abusing and not honoring and cherishing. And for me, that broke down the marriage covenant in such a way where, Joe, I knew that if I had stayed in that marriage, it would have been the death of me. Not from a physical standpoint, but my personhood was slowly fading away. And so I had to make a choice. And I believe that sometimes because we love God so much and we don't want to disappoint God, we take these vows seriously. Many people who are in the church or are of a faith tradition, they stay because they want to honor God and they believe in the sanctity of marriage. But I'm here to say also that God hates abuse. And I don't believe that God wants us to stay in a marriage that is destroying your personhood. And so for me, what helped me, Joe, to answer your question, was I did a lot of reading on books that was like doing the intersection between faith and abuse and helping me to kind of say, what is this? And how did I get into this? And then in counseling, like asking the questions and working through the process of, Joe, to be frank, forgiving myself for ignoring certain flags, forgiving others who tried to give me counsel around the marriage, but it wasn't good counsel for me. They were trying to keep us together because of that old belief system, when in reality, what they were doing was encourage me to stay in a destructive marriage. And so I had to forgive some other people who, who hurt me along the way. And so this whole process of saying, Jocelyn, your voice in all of this matters, and the only person who you really need to be accountable to is God. And so stop worrying about what these church people are saying. Stop worrying about everybody else saying, oh, you walked away from your marriage. Oh, you're a reverend. What is God saying to you? Because the entire time, Joe, throughout this whole process, the major lesson that I learned was that we need to listen to that voice that matters. And prior to the marriage, I didn't listen to that voice. I listened to other voices. I was afraid to call off the marriage. But God was speaking to me that entire time, and I didn't listen. And so I had to find my voice, and I had to say, you know what? If everybody hates me, I'm at peace with my decision. And that was a process I had to grow into, Joe.
And that's so powerful. You mentioned quite a few nuggets that I hope the audience is grabbing there. First, you mentioned that you had to come to realization that your creator, in this case, I call it God, you call it God, wasn't down with the abuse and was okay with you getting a divorce in that moment. Because what happens in a lot of these religious programs is they teach on like making it where it's a punishing God. And if you get a divorce or you do, you go against something that's in the Bible, then guess what? You're going to hell. So to come to that realization that, you know what, my God's on my side. My God, of my understanding, understands what I'm going through and doesn't want me unhappy, doesn't want me going through a situation where, it's against what he created me for, because God didn't create you to be unhappy and stay in a situation that's going to bring you down, that's going to drain your energy. He wants you to be lifted up. So to recognize that is powerful. And man, you mentioned something else that was so important. Not worrying about what the church people were thinking anymore. Worrying and focusing on what God wanted for you and what God thought, and making sure that you're in alignment with God. Man, that's so important for, someone who's going through a time that's similar to this, where they're looking to, turn their life around, or just, the average, entrepreneur out there who starts worrying about what other people are thinking when it comes to, building their business or making decisions. And that's another thing that you mentioned that's really important, Jocelyn, was the fact that you made a decision. And when you made the decision, you didn't look back. But something that you mentioned that was really powerful, and I'm curious how important this was to move forward, was the forgiving part. Mm. You mentioned, you had to forgive people that hurt you, but you also had to forgive yourself. How vital was that for this process?
It's vital, and it's not easy, Joe. It's one of the hardest things, because I think sometimes we have expectations of ourselves to know better. How many times have you found yourself in a situation, Joe, where you said, I'll never have that happen to me, or I'll never find myself in that situation? I am learning now that I got gray hairs that I dye often. I'm learning never say never, because it's one of those things where I just never thought I would find myself in that. And because of the training, because I, just thought I knew, I felt a lot of shame, and it was a series of poor decisions that I made. It was a series of ignoring the red flags. It was a series of also making decisions that impacted others because I had distanced myself from friends and started becoming isolated. And so it was this ripple effect of my poor decisions now impacting others. And so it was just a mess. This was chaos. And so for me, the shame, the guilt, the just the devastation, because even though it was abusive, I still grieved because I did love him. And looking back at the times in which I was journaling and trying to save the marriage, even though it was destructive, it was this just cluster of emotions that I felt. And at the end of the day, it was a lot to process. But after I started getting through the initial grief, Joe, anger just was one of the emotions that just flooded like my body. And it was, again, you talked about forgiveness of self, but also forgiveness of my ex who hurt me. It was and still is something that I have to process because I find myself being triggered at certain moments. I find myself in times in which I keep thinking about the past. For example, Joe, have you ever had a moment where you was like, it was a fork in the road and you keep going back to that moment saying, if I had only just made a decision to go right versus left, my life wouldn't have been crazy. And so for me, I replay the tape sometimes around, why did you go back into that marriage? Why did you say yes to get married? Why did you get back into that relationship? Why didn't you leave earlier? Why did you listen? And I've learned, Joe, that replaying the tape over and over and over again is not helpful. It's actually it's kind of self-torture because you can't get the time back. And as I have been working to forgive myself, and it's really accepting God's forgiveness because he already paid the price for us, by sending his son. And so as I'm working to accept God's forgiveness, I have to say, Jocelyn, it don't matter that you reverend. It don't matter if you speaker, author, and it don't matter. You human. And you get to make mistakes sometimes. And the blessing in all of this is that you know better. You learn from this. And honestly, Joe, I believe right now I'm experiencing tremendous post-traumatic growth from what I've gone through because I'm doing the work. I'm staying in counseling, and I feel like I'm more compassionate. I feel like I have more empathy. My ministry now, I work with women who survive domestic violence. I'm just a different person now. And so now I see it differently, and I'm continuing to grow and heal as a result.
That's a perfect example of turning that pain into the purpose. And you mentioned how, that forgiveness is process, but man, I think the biggest part of forgiveness is it's not about the person that you're forgiving. You're forgiving, yeah, you're forgiving for them, but it's really for self because it helps lift. Because what happens when you hold on to that resentment, it creates catabolic draining energy in your life. And who wants to live a life like that? That's not a way to live life. So, man, congratulations for being the powerful woman that you are. Congratulations for continuing to work on yourself and making a difference in the world because, man, you mentioned something else that's so important. That replaying the tape, that's another thing that's just going to bring that toxic energy. It does nothing but bring you down and drain you. Might as well just let it go. The past is the past for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And, utilizing it to catapult into your future, which you're doing, man, that's awesome work, man. That really is phenomenal. And
Thank you, Joe.
yeah. So I'm curious though. Obviously, I mean, being a reverend and the way you speak about your relationship with God, spiritualities, obviously at the core of your core values. But what are some other core values that you latched on to? Once, because I believe once that belief system gets cracked, which you cracked through it and you built a new belief system, there's core values that are uncovered that you kind of can dig into to go back when you go through difficult times. What are some of those core values?
I believe that a main value that I leaned on tremendously during that time was family, both blood and chosen family. I think me being someone who was already introverted and going through an abusive relationship, if you're married or not, typically what happens is you become isolated and you kind of find yourself in a silo. So for me, when I was going through this shift, I had to learn to open up to family, chosen family and blood, and say, I'm not okay. I need help. And be in community and begin to be vocal about these emotions that I would in the past pretend didn't exist or I was okay. But I had to remove the mask around what I was going through and say, I'm not strong in this moment. I am hurt. I'm crying. I need support. That was huge for me, Joe. And so the value of family helped get me through. I think another element that got me through the situation as well was choosing to slow down and be in the quiet. That's not necessarily a value. That's more so, Joe, me speaking to what helped me to navigate this. I had to sit with self. My whole life, I've been very busy. I've been like flooding my days with work, ministry, and the whole nine. But when you hit rock bottom, you finding time to sit with yourself and your creator and reflect and be honest with the mistakes that you made. Because hear me, if anyone who's in a bad situation right now, I'm not blaming you for it, but I think everyone has a role in their pain at some point. And when it came to my situation, I had a role in my pain. And that was me ignoring the voice. That was me ignoring wise counsel, because some of my friends did tell me, don't do it. There was a lot going on with that. And so for me, Joe, a part of my healing process was to sit in the quiet and look in the mirror and face myself. And in doing that, and then I guess the last thing I would say that was a value of mine that I had to extend to myself, that I was so used to extending to others. I had to be kind to myself. I had to learn to extend grace to me because of the fact that I had made this mistake, and I used to have this threshold of perfection I was striving for in my life. But I had to value grace in that moment for myself.
That's so important, so powerful. The sitting with yourself and being able to connect with the higher source is so valuable, so important. when it comes to spirituality, when it comes to life, when it comes to discipline, being able to sit there with yourself. So there's priceless. And also not playing the victim role and trying to just point fingers at everybody and everything and not realizing to be able to look in the mirror and say, you know what, I got some faults here too. I played a role in this whole situation also, that in order for me to make a true change in my life, I have to peel that onion back and take stock of who I am and do that moral inventory. So, man, that's so important. And I'm curious because you went through all of this trauma in the process of trying to build a business. Man, that talk about challenging, talk about really overcoming adversity. And while you're hitting rock bottom, you're still building a business which has its own adversities along the way, right? So what kept you going to be able to continue growing your business and keep going to that next level, taking it from national to international with what you're doing? We're going to get into what you're doing, but I'm just curious, what kept you moving with that?
Joe, honestly, my business, my ministry, my core purpose is one of the reasons why I said I had to leave my marriage, because I felt if I stayed, it was one or the other. and so for me, my why was so strong because my business is my ministry. And I felt that there are people who were relying on me. My ministry was an answer to someone's prayer. My work saved lives. I could not quit. And so when I made a decision to walk out, I had no plan. I literally just checked myself into a hotel. And at the time, I had like 6 speaking engagements lined up within like the next 6 weeks. It was like one of the busiest seasons. And I'm doing speaking engagements on trauma while I'm wrecked at the time, but still going on stages trying to teach people. And people will come up to me sometimes and address me by my married last name. And I would have to keep myself together and not cry while trying to present this information. And so it was rough. I had to just plow through because everything in me wanted to stay in bed and just crawl under a rock because my life was falling apart. But really, my life was falling into place. And that's what I see now. I mean, looking back, I'm like a year removed from the situation. And yes, it was hard, but I had so much to fight for. And I think that's what it was. It was like, this is bigger than me. So even though I'm in pain, and yes, I'm going to deal with the pain, counseling, all this other stuff on the side, but I will not, under any circumstance, let what's happening to me compromise the purpose and vision that God has for my life. And I was that committed, Joe. And that's, I think, again, my ministry, my calling, that's what saved me in as it relates to what I was going through.
Man, God, the way God works in our life, man, is incredible. Incredible because, you were at a point, at a crossroads where you had to choose between your marriage or what it was you were doing and the mission that you had in place. And once you made that decision, I just took you off to that next level. That's so awesome. Such a blessing. I love for you to share with the audience, where you are now, what you're doing, and where they can find you. But I'm curious. If you don't mind, I want you to say where the business was when you were in the process of leaving the marriage, and where it is now, because I know there's a big, huge jump there, and I want the audience to know that.
Yeah. So where the business was, it was as if it's so interesting. It was as if as I was leaving the marriage, it's like my life, my business was like just on this acceleration track, and it was like everything in my personal life was going up in flames. As my ministry was taking off. It was the wildest thing. I'm traveling, I'm getting all these conferences, speaking engagements. People are telling me you're the one, and like it was mind blowing, and that's how I knew that I was making the right decision, because as that door was closing, and it didn't close without a fight. That divorce process is a whole nother podcast. But as I was going through that craziness, it was one of those things where doors were opening up, and I was getting visibility, and my name's getting out there. And I didn't even really have time to self promote myself as a speaker because I was dealing with drama. But God put my name in the right spaces. And so through those different speaking opportunities, through the visibility that I was starting to get now in the Chicagoland area, if someone Googles trauma Christian counseling, my company ranks #1 on Google. And I'm like, oh, I celebrated that the other day with our team, and seeing how, we last year we supported over 24 churches in helping them to start trauma healing ministries. I did I think it was well over 30 workshops on trauma healing in different spaces, and retreats in North Carolina, and, in different cities. And so God is just opening up tremendous doors in my ministry. And Joe, I also, one other thing, we're not talking about that today, I get to also coach other women who are answering their call. And so my life is full of joy every day. I wake up excited to hit the ground running, to do what God has called me to do. I didn't feel like that 1 year ago. From today, I was still in an Airbnb house surfing, trying to figure out where I was going to stay 1 year ago. So to know that today I have so much joy and I have peace, Joe. And peace, you can't pay for that.
Yeah, sure can't. Definitely can't. So tell the audience what it is you're doing with helping other women also.
Yeah, so I have a second company. Is called Women in the Ministry, and I coach younger versions of myself, women who feel called to start a ministry, but they don't know where to start. And so I help them to, identify their next steps, learn the business side of ministry, how to market your ministry, how to get revenue for your ministry, how to, develop your programs and your products. And so Women in the Ministry is committed for Christian women entrepreneurs to help you to take that next step. And so it's been a blessing to coach women in that area.
Awesome. You got a good mentor, that's for sure. Please also tell the audience where they can find you, and it's going to be in the show notes as well.
Yeah, I think the best place to find me is my main website. It's jocelynjjones.com. There you can find out information about my coaching, my trauma healing, and all that. That's my main website. And then, Joe, may I also offer a free gift
Absolutely.
to your audience? Yeah. So if anybody wants to learn more about how to do work around becoming a trauma healing church, you can go to traumahealingchurch.com. And there I have a free trauma healing church resource guide for those who desire to do that work in terms of ministry.
Awesome. And your social media handles will all be in the show notes as well. So Jocelyn, there's a few questions that I ask all my guests. The first is, what does the word purpose mean?
What does purpose mean to me?
Yes.
Purpose. I believe when our gifts meet a need that the world has, that's purpose. So for me and for everyone who's listening, look at your gifts, look at the need that the world is seeking for someone to answer, and that equals purpose-driven work.
Gifts, gifts, gave you those gifts for a reason. And when you hear the word reforge, what comes to mind?
I I think it is molding your life back together. It's when your life is shattered, like my life was. I think of the Japanese art of kintsugi, how they take these broken pieces of things that most people would throw away in the trash, and they put those broken pieces back together and infuse it with gold and make this beautiful pottery, beautiful piece of art that people are like, oh man, that's amazing. I love that art piece. Not realizing that that used to be looked at as trash, but it's a masterpiece. And I believe that all of us can reforge our lives, Joe, because all of us have had some drama. You might not have gone through domestic violence, but you might have had something else that you've gone through at some point. And at some point, you felt like your life might have been trash. But God is so faithful. He can mold your pieces back together into something that is considered a masterpiece for his glory. And so for me, that's what I think of when I hear the word reforge.
Love that. Beautiful. And speaking of, people out there who are struggling with their trauma and being able to bounce back in their life, their business, their relationship, their health, what's one piece of advice that you could give someone who's trying to reforge their life and they're looking for a starting point?
I would say this. If God gives you a new day, that's an opportunity to start over. And as we talked about earlier, we can't change the past, but we can choose today. And we can make changes today. And so no matter what you've gone through, if you have breath, you can choose to design a life that you deserve and you desire. And so discover that power that lies within you. Joe, I know that oftentimes when people have experienced trauma, loss, devastation, they can feel powerless. But you do have agency. You do have choice. And you, Joe, just your testimony alone is a reminder that it doesn't matter what you've gone through. You can reforge your life. And so I encourage anyone to just get up and know with support, through faith, and through commitment, you can create the life that you desire and deserve.
Yes. And if you got that breath in you, if God's still breathing into your lungs, you have every opportunity to create your own destiny at that point. Man, so I'm curious, and I'm sure there's people in the audience who are curious about something the audience doesn't know about you that you enjoy doing for fun.
That I enjoy doing for fun, I would say I love weightlifting. I
Okay.
used to be a CrossFitter for like 7, 8 years. I was in that gym like a gym rat, just throwing them dumbbells around. And so I do love to work out. Fitness, health is important to me, is a part of one of those things that can keep you going. And so for me, that's something I love to do, Joe.
Oh, man, I love it. I love it. Yeah, the gym is vital in my life. I don't blame you. It's definitely one of my hobbies. But Jocelyn, Reverend Jocelyn, thank you so much, so much. I'm so blessed to have you as a friend, as someone that's in my life, and to have you on the show. I mean, I knew you were going to bring the energy. I knew we were going to go to church, but man, I didn't think we were going to bring Sunday on a Friday, and we did. We did. I loved it, love it.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for allowing me the space to share my story. This was a safe space for me to do that, and I appreciate you holding space for me.
Absolutely, an honor. And for everybody out there listening and watching, thank y'all for checking it out. And I'm going to ask for the favor that I always ask for. LFSS, like, follow, subscribe, and most importantly, share. There's somebody out there today that's struggling to reforge their life, and they don't have the tools. They don't know where to start. They're not watching this episode. They're not watching prior episodes. And this episode or another episode could help save their life, help them be able to, bring their business back, bring their life back, bring their relationship back, their health, their finances. So please, man, share the episode and stay productive, stay profitable, and stay blessed.
You've been listening to Reforge Your Life with your host, Joe Rivera. Make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. To learn more about Joe Rivera and how he can help you or your organization reforge your life and regain your place at the top, head on over to withjoerivera.com and follow Joe on all social platforms. The Reforge Your Life podcast was produced by Thrive Loud Productions. Thanks for listening.